All right, now can you hear me? Christian? Oh, there you are. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's good. For some reason, it put, I have a couple of options when we start. One of them is to put people in a waiting room before the meeting starts. And I always uncheck that, but for some reason it checked it automatically this time. So that's the reason I didn't figure out you guys were in a waiting room. All right. So can everybody see the PowerPoint screen now?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. Well, we started out or ended up last time talking about Kant's difference from Hume and British empiricism. So I want to finish up that talk today, and on Tuesday we will go into the textbook together and select some things that it's important that we know about for the quiz coming up next Thursday. Everybody remember that there's going to be a take-home quiz. I'm going to send out a reminder this afternoon about that. Not going to be a big thing, so don't obsess about it. It's mostly going to be on the book and with some questions about the talks that we've had together. But mostly on the book, and we'll cover that, as I say, in Tuesday's meeting. All right, we said here, if you will recall, that things that the thing that Kant adds to, well, Kant adds two things to Hume's observations about how we know things. One of them, of course, is that we know things like analytic a priori, things like mathematical truths, tell us something about the world. They tell us that the world is an ordered place, or at least that there is a mathematical order in the world. So at minimum, it means that there's mathematical order. Now, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that order applies to reality, but there is order, and that is an important thing to know. And the analytic a priori, unlike Hume's relations of ideas, Kant says, does tell us something important about the world. And to that he added things that were synthetic a priori, prior to existence, or may we say necessary for existence. Things like God, the immortality of the soul, morality, etc. Then we talked about the tabula rasa, John Locke, the major British empiricist, the sort of father of modern empiricism, has said that we gain nothing except through experience. So prior to our lives, there is literally nothing that exists. Everyone, perhaps you've heard, I don't know, but we used to joke about the difference between an idealist and a realist, the way they answer the question: if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Well, the empiricist would say no. If no one hears it, it doesn't make, there is no sound. The realist would say absolutely there is a sound. So that's the old anecdote about the difference between a realist and an idealist. Now, the most important thing for what we're covering this morning is this word deontology. Um, Deontology is normally translated as duty, the study of duty. We have two examples of that in our textbook. We have Kant, and then a British philosopher, Sir David Ross, that talked about absolute duties as well. But for Sir David Ross, we have a duty to others. Kant would say we have a duty to ourselves, but that's getting ahead. For Kant, we have a duty to ourselves and to others. Normally, now our new textbook here, Poiman, is really pretty good about this. He's almost right. He doesn't stress duty nearly as much as many textbooks who don't understand Kant stress. Most of them simply translate deontology as duty. To understand it purely as duty is just absolutely wrong. Deon is the Greek word for necessity. So when I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, I have a deon. When I say 2 plus 2, I have a deon to come up with 4. Now that's not a duty to come up with 4. No one, I don't say 4 because someone made me. I say 4 because it is right, it is correct, it is absolutely true. So the 4 equals the 2 plus 2. So deon for Kant is the, rather than being duty in a sense of a kind of a military duty, is a duty in terms of the equal symbol. And it should be considered only in the context of the a priori, both analytic and synthetic. So it's not a matter of experience. And I think that's where most commentators on Kant really get mixed up, because they're looking at it simply in the British empiricist sense of being a military kind of duty. They simply do not understand why Kant doesn't use the German word for duty, rather chooses the Greek word for duty, because it's not a military requirement. If the drill sergeant says, do 20 push-ups, it's your duty to do the 20 push-ups because he's made you do those 20 push-ups. If someone says, what does 2 plus 2 equal? They don't force you to come up with 4. You simply know that 4 is the right answer. 4 is mathematically true. That's what the equal sign means. So most interpreters, and Poiman falls into this category sometimes, he's not consistent in his consistent understanding of Kant. They understand it from this a posteriori experience, the synthetic a posteriori. They understand it from the standpoint of experience. Hume's not talking about that. He's talking about morality as being an absolute requirement once the categories are posited correctly. Now, as you're reading, and everyone pay attention to this slide, as you're reading, pay particular attention in Poiman to the sections on the categorical and hypothetical imperatives. So that's important. and also in the section on the laws of nature. So pay particular attention to these two sections on Kant. Those are going to be very important, and I can guarantee you that most, if not all, of the questions will come from those sections. So you should study, anytime you see these words, imperatives or laws, in chapter 8, you should study that carefully, because the duty to ethics, the duty to do what is right, is a law. It's not a suggestion, it's a law. Now, let me leave you with a couple of anecdotes about Immanuel Kant. We'll close out today's session. Immanuel Kant lived to be an old person. He lived in Königsberg, which is now Leningrad. That part of Germany was ceded to Poland and the Soviet Union under the hegemony of the Soviet Union after World War II. But it had been part of the state of Prussia up to that time. So he was a Prussian, from a Prussian peasant family. His mother and father were devout pietist Lutherans. And you can see some of that in his ethics. Even though he rejected religion as a reason for doing what is right and wrong, he somehow never got rid of his devout religious upbringing. He was always interested in the right and the good. That, by the way, that's the name of Sir David Ross's book, The English Deontologist, The Right and the Good. He was very methodical in everything he did. As a matter of fact, Leonhard Euler, the great German mathematician, actually had a cute little part of his unsolvable mathematical quandaries is called the Philosopher's Walk. You can look up Euler and Philosopher's Walk, and he's got the little caricature kind of Immanuel Kant, the great professor, walking around the bridges of Königsberg every morning at 9 o'clock. He came out with his Batman, his personal assistant, and the personal assistant would hold the umbrella for the professor, and he would walk around Königsberg. He did it every morning at 9 o'clock. And the town criers, the town workmen, if the clock said 9:01 and Kant came out, they would immediately set the clock to 9 o'clock. So he was so punctual that they assumed that the clock was wrong if it was not 9 o'clock when Kant came out of his domicile. So that's a little historical tidbit about Kant. The other couple of things to remember and to ponder on is one of Kant's famous statements. This is the pre-critical. Kant's got two periods in his life: the pre-critical period when he was under the influence of his rational teachers, Leibniz and Christian Wolff, and the later period, sometimes called the Critique of Pure Reason period, after the publication of the Critique, his great work on metaphysics and epistemology and physics. Part of the pre-critical writings is a famous statement: ethics is nothing more than what every well-brought-up child should know. That's very similar to things that you might find in Aristotle. So there's that part of Kant's early ethics. The second comes from his foundation of the metaphysics of morals, That's his great work on the post-critical period in his time, in his work. There's nothing good but a good will. For Kant, that means that your intention, you can't control your intentions, but you can control your will. And we've talked about this before. If we're heading home in a normal time when all of us are out meeting together and we're all going home from class, and you see that I've been involved in an accident and my car is turned upside down, and you come up and there's flames coming out of the car, and I'm trapped in my seatbelt, turned upside down in my car, and you cut the seatbelt, drop me out so that I don't burn to death. But in the meantime, after you cut me out, I fall down on the top of the inverted roof of my car and break my neck, and it kills me. There's nothing that you can do about that. You intended to save my life. So there's nothing good, but the only thing that can be judged morally for Kant is your intention, and that intention was to save me. Now we have codes built into our statute system in North Carolina and in most states called Good Samaritan laws that encode within the law that principle of Kant. There's nothing good but a good will. So those Good Samaritan laws mean that you can't be charged for trying to help me and in the meantime somehow harming me because your intent was to help me. All right, so that's another famous saying I'll leave you to ponder on your own. The last thing that I want to say is that Kant establishes the absolute integrity of the human being, the individual human being. For Kant, and this is important to understand, and it's something to think about, for Kant, all of humanity together, so if you add up everybody who is living today, they have no more value than one person. That's quite a bit different, remember, than utilitarianism that says the greatest good for the greatest number. Kant's quite the opposite of that. And that would go, that statement of Kant would go for even the person who was mentally challenged. The 96-year-old about to die for Immanuel Kant is just as significant as the newborn child. The 96-year-old about to die has no greater or lesser rights than the newborn, and vice versa. So that turns utilitarianism upside down. So think about that. We will meet again on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and we'll go over, I'll pull up the text on the screen, and we'll go over the text, and I'll highlight some areas that you should know for the quiz. And we might actually go over utilitarianism too, because remember the quiz is going to be on chapters 7 and 8, utilitarianism and Immanuel Kant. So we'll go over, let's plan to go over both of those chapters together, and I'll show you in the actual textbook itself, the computer textbook, the sections that we're going to take the quiz from. And remember, the quiz will be from the book and from these little chats that we've had. And I'll remind you about the important things in those as well. Any questions?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Well, we'll meet Tuesday at 10. I'll send out another invitation, and this time I won't lock you in a room before we get started.
Thank you.
And just finish reading your chapters and watching the videos, as boring as they might be. And encourage your other classmates too. These are hard times, and I can assure you that you're going to get you're going to get extra credit just for hanging in. So don't worry about grades or any kind of things like that. You got enough to worry about. So as long as you're showing up for the chats or keeping in contact with me about the chats. And one of the great things about Zoom is it might be boring, but at least I can make it available to you so that everybody's on the same playing field. All right, everybody have a good weekend. And please remember that if you need me for anything, I'm just an email away, and I check this 50 times a day. So if you need me, if you need answers to any questions, and you guys that are doing the thesis paper instead of the quizzes, as I said the last time, it's time to be thinking about what you want to do. And checking with me on that via email. If I need to set up a personal Zoom for you, we can do that, chat on Zoom about your project. And I'll be glad to take a look at any papers beforehand and give you some suggestions about how you might make them better. So just be thinking about that and communicating with me about that. Any questions?
No, sir.
All right. Well, everybody have a good weekend, and thank you so much for showing up, and I'll speak with you later.
Stay safe, Dr. Dean.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.